Help support Friendo Club by going to patreon.com/Steven Larson or clicking join at youtube.com/Steven Larson. Access to bonus episodes, question threads for the Going In Raw podcast, and entry to our monthly wrestling predictions challenges. Join the Friendo Club today. Hey, Friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
And welcome back to Going In Raw Countout. On today's episode, we're talking game-changing free agents in the world of wrestling. I think it was a couple weeks ago, Larson, that we did an episode on, like, the opposite
free agent signings. Worst.
Yeah, just
here's
piss
the thing.
poor.
This is the way I look at this list. These are free agent signings that are neither good nor bad. It just changed the game.
It changed the game.
Impactful. Maybe altered the course of the wrestling business forever.
Mm-hmm.
Things that we maybe never thought would ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
These are the type of scenarios that I thought, let's look at here, as opposed to, these are good or these are bad.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. On top of that, we did some research, and last time we did one of these lists back like 5 years ago, it didn't perform very well. So
best free agent signings, it performed pretty mid for our numbers back then. So
right, exactly. So we're here trying to get a game-changing episode of Countout in here.
You got that right, bud.
Yeah, anyways, let's go ahead and kick this off. Number 10. AJ Styles heads to WWE. That's right.
2016.
2016, man. This guy was off of, I think it was like a 2-year run there in New Japan where he came in, immediately won the IWGP title. Three title defenses later, he lost it to Hiroshi Tanahashi. Had a classic match against Shinsuke Nakamura. And then the day of Wrestle Kingdom, when he had that match against Shinsuke Nakamura, January of 2016, he let the good people there at Bishi Road, New Japan,
parent company, yes,
Splitsville, WWE. Almost didn't happen. He was in talks to return
to TNA with the Good Brothers.
With the Good Brothers.
They had an agreement in place. No contract signed, but an agreement in place. I read the thing, too. Did you get it from Pro Wrestling Torch?
I went dumber now. I went to Wikipedia.
Oh, yeah. I looked at the link from there and went to PW Torch. They had, merch plans, creative ideas in place.
Did they pitch him on, when you say merch plans, they're like, AJ, listen.
I don't know if they had another shirt with the on it. No.
Well, just say it. Human seed. That's what his old shirt looked like.
Yeah, it did. It looked like
human seed.
Yeah, exactly. No details as far as that, but apparently he was blown away. So apparently it was down to TNA, Ring of Honor, and then WWE came in with a massive offer. And AJ going to WWE is not only huge because here's AJ Styles, a former TNA guy. Mm-hmm. How many long-time TNA guys at that point went to WWE?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Not a lot, know. And then, AJ went to New Japan, member of Bullet Club, really kicked his career into another gear.
Yeah.
And it was him, it was Nakamura, and it was the Good Brothers, who were all in that same kind of class, if you will, in early 2016, who left New Japan to go to WWE. And it's just, he had such a long and storied career in TNA. Mm-hmm. He's there since basically the inception of the company.
Yeah, he was.
Until 2014. Mm-hmm. A dozen years there. I wonder if there was a portion of wrestling fans who thought, I don't know if we'll ever see Uncle Al and AJ Styles ever make it to WWE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then lo and behold, at the Rumble 2016, there he was.
Yeah, I like that. He was like, TNA offering me $25,000 a year, Ring of Honor coming in with a big $26,000 a year, and then WWE's like, AJ,
all right, here's the deal.
Listen,
here's
AJ.
Here's the deal, Steve. You kid. But according to the Torch here, PW Torch, it was a 6-figure deal from Ring of Honor.
What?
That's what it said.
Wow. 6 figures over 18 years?
I don't know the term. But AJ initially left TNA because
$100,000 over 4 years.
Because they wanted to take a 60% pay cut.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And he was like, I've been the guy in TNA for a dozen years. You want me to take that much of a pay cut? Huh?
Yeah.
Nah.
Talk about a game changer, though, because I think one thing that you hit on here, him, Gallows, and Anderson, and Nakamura, that was sort of, I know Finn came in before them, but in terms of guys, Finn had to change his name. Kenta had to change his name. AJ came in and
straight to main roster.
Straight to main roster. Obviously Shinsuke went to NXT, but I kind of feel like Shinsuke probably was ready for the main roster. But AJ Styles had so established himself, probably more so than anybody except for maybe Samoa Joe. They were sort of, 1A, 1B perhaps.
Yeah.
As guys who, they established their brands outside of WWE so strongly that it would have been kind of ridiculous for them not to have used AJ Styles' name and Samoa Joe's name. But, Gallows and Anderson as well, the brand that they had established outside WWE. WWE wanted that. They didn't want to bring Festus back in or rebrand Carl Anderson for something or as something. Same with Samoa Joe and AJ Styles. So AJ Styles, in terms of being, a game changer, not just in his own right, once Vince McMahon found that AJ could in fact be his bulldog or pitbull. It was pitbull, not the entertainer. He said AJ, yeah, I need a pit bull. And AJ was like, oh, you mean the entertainer? Like, hand open. That's right. And he was like, goddamn. And then AJ was like champion for a year and helped the renaissance of SmackDown in 2016 when it was like really, really good.
It was. And
had a kill. I mean, since then, just an absolutely just stellar career. But, in a larger sense, the idea that dudes coming in that have already established their brands outside WWE can come in and be treated like $1 million. Really sort of started with AJ Styles and his debut at the Rumble.
Yeah, it definitely did. And that his I won't call it rookie year in WWE because he was far from a rookie, but his first year in WWE, coming into the Rumble, had an awesome bout against John Cena that year at SummerSlam. We were there for. Yeah. And, shortly thereafter that was champion, held it for about a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah.
Heck
really,
of a first
really
year.
Good stuff. Heck of a first year. Let's move on now to number 9. Mercedes Moné heads to New Japan Professional Wrestling.
So, Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné, member of the Four Horsewomen, coming out of NXT. And since they came up to the main roster, they've basically accomplished everything, collectively and for the most part individually as well. Mm-hmm. Multi-time champion of both Raw and SmackDown, tag champions, you name it, they've all pretty much have done it. Mm-hmm. And mid-2022, May to be exact, there were some creative differences reportedly where Sasha, Mercedes, Naomi, Trinity were not pleased with how things were proceeding and walked out on Raw on May 16th. Mm-hmm. And never came back.
Yeah. Letting down, by the way, the entire WWE universe. They
listen to Vince McMahon feeding Michael Cole those words. Yes. Quite the opposite from my perspective. Yeah. I thought it was great that here's the thing about this. This is why it feels like such a game changer, is that for years, WWE was a top game in town. If you were unhappy, guess what? You kind of just had to deal with it.
Yeah.
And if you endeavored to put your foot down and walk out, more often than not, it seemed like at a certain point, they'd find a way to bring you back in. Mm-hmm. And here was a situation where two women were not happy with their situation, walked out, and stood up for themselves, knowing full well that the wrestling landscape had changed and WWE didn't have all the leverage anymore.
Well,
we have so many different avenues, different places where you can go perform at a high level on a large platform and still make really good money. You can go pursue those other endeavors and not have to rely solely on WWE and their paycheck.
There was something that, in terms of being a game changer, again, kind of like AJ Styles, is you're absolutely right, but the risk is much greater for women because, as we've seen now with AEW, TV time is precious over there. Yes. There's not a lot given to the women. And so by the time Mercedes and Trinity left WWE, it was kind of a risk because for the men, they can go to AEW, they can go to New Japan, they can go to Impact. There's a million places. that the men could go. For the women, yes, there is Stardom out there, but as you know, New Japan Professional Wrestling does not have a women's, or at the time, they did not have a women's division. They were owned by this, their parent company was the same that owned Stardom, but you know, it's not like you can just hop over there. Impact, not quite the platform of, you know, an AEW if you can get in there. And so it's not like the options were like as plentiful as for the men.
But I mean, compared to even just 5 years prior.
Oh, way different.
A sea change. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A sea change.
Different. Yeah.
And so for Mercedes being the first WWE star that was a woman that put her foot down and said, I'm not going to do this, and then goes on and, you know, basically transforms the way New Japan does, you know, a woman's division. Primarily, like I believe, like because she wrestled in Stardom as part of her thing, right?
Well,
or
she wrestled both New Japan shows
shows
and she wrestled some Stardom shows.
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so for her to go over there and make a splash in the way that she did, and then, you know, it comes out that ticket sales for her first show in San out immediately upon the announcement. And on top of that, subscribers to New Japan World went through the roof, and she made a shit ton of money. Like the deal she cut with New Japan was a massive one. Kind of unprecedented when it came to a women's division wrestler going from WWE out into the world. And again, establishing a precedent that now, you know, could be used by other women who are maybe not terribly happy with their lot in WWE.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, like a lot of women are like WWE since Vince left, or since Triple H took over, I should say, has really endeavored to put more women on screen.
I think especially the latter half of this year, especially.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen wrestlers like Tegan Knox, Xia Li, wrestlers who had been on the main roster for a while, but not exactly utilized.
Yeah.
Being incorporated into stories on a more regular basis. And it's awesome to see.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. That's not to say there won't be some who might understand that now there is, you know, it's understood now that there is a market. They could use that as leverage for talks with WWE, or, you know, if hey, I want to go to AEW, I want to go to New Japan, whatever, there are options out there. Mercedes proved that, hey, you know what? You can take a brand that was built in WWE under one name and then go, you know, and be successful with a different name in a different company, even now as a woman in this current landscape of WWE. And that's not even to talk about, like, you know, the other opportunities that are already out there. Obviously, she has translated, you know, her success into like a limited role in the Star Wars stuff and, you know, other things. So yeah, there's a lot of money out there to be made, and she sort of proved you could do it at a high level.
Yep, definitely, most definitely.
Next. Let's see here. Yeah, next is number 8.
8.
Chris Jericho to AEW.
So you remember when this was all happening, when AEW was about to be birthed, when the Young Bucks and Kenny and Hangman had that thing up on January 1st of 2019, right before Wrestle Kingdom as well, when Kenny was still champion. And they're like, hey, we got a new promotion happening called AEW.
Yeah.
It's like some of the drama out there, Wrestle Kingdom matches, but nonetheless. So they had this press conference like about a week later on January 9th, 2019. And, you know, we didn't know what to expect.
This is almost 5 years ago.
I know.
God.
It's crazy. We didn't know what to expect. Like, there was a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement because at the time, Kenny and the entire the Elite, Kenny and the Young Bucks and Hangman and Cody, they were at their peak popularity just coming off of the first All In, which was mildly successful just like 4 months prior. But still at the same time, yeah, they sold out one arena of 10,000 seats, but how would they be able to do that on a regular basis? Or would they be able to do it on a regular basis? What would this new promotion look like? And they had this event, and suddenly Chris Jericho, a legend in the wrestling business, shows up, and he is a part of the company. And instantly, you get the idea. Okay, this isn't just like a Splinter Ring of Honor type deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're trying to sell out arenas on a regular basis.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Loading up with a name like Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
And it was pretty monumental to have a company that was aspiring to be an alternative, a serious alternative, a competitor, if you will, to WWE, but then to bring in Chris Jericho to be kind of like the most well-known public face of that company. You're like, okay, there's a plan in place to bring in fans who might not know the Elite from New Japan Pro Wrestling and shirts in Hot Topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
But we're bringing in Chris Jericho. Wrestling fans know who Chris Jericho is.
Yeah. Yeah, this was massive, and it's great because, in full disclosure, obviously, if you've watched our weekly shows, we've been a bit critical of Chris Jericho.
We soured on the Ocho, yes.
A little bit. Not to say he can't reinvent himself for an 18th time and maybe capture our imaginations again, but historically speaking, in terms of a career, Chris Jericho is a guy who has had an absolutely stellar one in terms of reinvention, in terms of, I don't even know. Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about him more later on this list as part of that. But for a guy who was a groundbreaker in so many different ways, to go and you could bundle in his New Japan signing as well. And a case could be made that his New Japan signing was on par with his AEW signing, because this guy was, obviously after he left WCW, came to WWE, like a main event, multiple time world champion guy. And for him to leave WWE and actually go out and go to New Japan was absolutely like a mind blower. Like the Painmaker stuff, it was like, what the hell is happening right now? And then for him to continue on that journey away from WWE and become, as you said, sort of the most recognizable face, it was immediately obvious, yes, like you said, they're looking to sell a lot of tickets, and this is probably the kind of face that can land you a cable TV deal. And yeah, it was kind of shocking, and you could tell that this was going to be a different situation, and that maybe, just maybe, in many ways, it could be, if not, direct competition, certainly alternative to WWE, yes, using the language of pro wrestling on cable television that WWE established, but in a way that does come off as fresh and interesting. And whereas WWE seemed to be asleep at the wheel at the time, especially in 2019, a breath of fresh air when it came to creative, and Chris Jericho meant that they were serious about it.
Definitely. It definitely meant they were serious about not just having a new wrestling promotion, having a new televised wrestling promotion. We haven't had something like that pop up on a national level since TNA back in 2002.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So it was a pretty huge deal to see Chris Jericho walk out on that stage and step up to that podium.
Yeah. Right.
We still marked out way more for Pac when Pac showed up at the other press conference.
Because we love Pac was in such an interesting spot, because of course he was coming off of his own walkout of WWE, and then he was doing the stuff in Dragon Gate, where he was like their super champion guy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, God, that was almost 5 years ago. My goodness.
We were sitting at the office watching those press conferences.
Oh, no, I know. We got the GIF somewhere on my computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyways, before we continue on, Larson, would you like to pay some bills?
Let's do it.
All right.
This episode of Going in Raw is sponsored by BetterHelp, Steve. If I can be.
Yes.
Let's be real for a moment.
Keep it real.
I know that people usually associate this time of year, holidays, with joy and spending time with the family. But the holidays also, they can be a lot. Mm-hmm. And for some, it could lead to stress, anxiety, and sadness.
Yeah, that's true. And if you're dealing with the seasonal blues during the holidays, therapy can be a bright spot amid all the stress. Something to look forward to help you feel grounded and to provide you with tools to manage everything going on.
Yeah, back in my mid-20s, I started dealing with really severe anxiety. It led me to have one particularly forgettable holiday season. I don't want to Remember that one. Eventually, my anxiety got to the point where I realized that if I wanted to live a happy, productive life, that I needed to go to therapy. And once I found a therapist I felt comfortable talking to, I was able to learn the tools, positive coping skills I needed to better manage my anxiety and get me back on track to living a happier, more productive life.
So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. All you got to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge.
So find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/raw today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/raw.
All right, let's move on here to number 7. Ric Flair goes to WWE. So wait a second. Is this the consortium Ric Flair, or is this back in 92 Ric Flair?
This is back in 91 Ric Flair.
Oh, 91. Sorry. Yeah, that's right.
August of 91. So as this is a story I've heard. I don't recall if I've heard this corroborated by other sources, but we'll talk about the story as it's been told, I think, by Flair, where in 91, he and Jim Herd, who was running WCW at the time, not seeing eye to eye.
He wanted to be Spartacus or something, right?
He wanted him to shave his head and change his name to Spartacus, not necessarily be a top guy anymore, take a pay cut. This is after Flair being on top of NWA/WCW for like more than a decade, being the guy there.
This story has been out there for a very, very long time.
Yeah,
I imagine it's probably true because it's been around for such a long time.
I would guess so.
So was it ever hold on a second. Whoa, back up. Do you recall, was this ever was it ever explained if Spartacus was still supposed to be Ric Flair, or was he supposed to be a different person?
Dude, I don't know. They did all sorts of crazy stuff in WCW back then.
Yeah, they did.
They had an idea that, like, the Black Scorpion thing. There was like 5 different people underneath that mask at various junctures. Ole Anderson did the voice of it at one point. It was ultimately Ric Flair, yeah.
Rick Rude. Was it Flair or Rude?
It was Ric Flair. It was ultimately
Rude?
Black Scorpion.
Rude was somebody else.
Yeah.
Rude was a different masked wrestler. Anyways, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Anyway, so eventually Jim Herd fired Flair, had him vacate WCW World Title. You can look that up. Go ahead, look that up.
The Halloween Phantom.
That's what it was. So Flair went in August 91, signed to WWF. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. He was still recognized as the NWA world champ. Mm-hmm. So he rolls into WWF, that belt. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty nuts.
Because he still had he still had the retainer or something. Like he paid for the belt,
Yeah, right.
The retainer for the belt, so he still had it.
Yeah.
So he rolled something I imagine as an 80s wrestling fan, especially if you watch nearly exclusively NWA product, you probably never thought you'd see Ric Flair show up in the Fed, much less with the NWA World Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah.
And then be pushed as a top guy.
So, like, if you really try to put yourself in the moment. So, like, I was not watching at the time because I was, I didn't watch wrestling back then. Weren't you watching wrestling at the time?
My early peak wrestling watching years was probably from 85 to 89, 90.
Okay, so at this time you were not you didn't see this happen.
No, not live. Okay. I remember I'd tune into Superstars every now and again.
I remember Sam Roberts, I think, on his podcast had said, because, back then TV consumption was wildly different than it is now. And so there were people who were not even aware of the NWA. If you were just a kid, growing up in the 80s and then... That
would have been me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And you're watching, maybe you're lucky enough to catch whatever they got on USA. But or you watch the NBC, the Saturday Night Main Event type stuff or whatever, you're able to keep up. And you have no idea that there is an NWA.
Yeah.
Because why would you? And then this dude shows up with a title that they started pixelating because I guess NWA probably filed some sort of injunction or something. And so they had to start pixelating. He called himself the Real World's Champion. If you think about how weird it is that Vince McMahon was hey, we're going to do kind of an invasion guy angle, where he shows up from there, even though like unless you're in the South, like and you pay close attention to that shit, then you know what's going on.
Yeah.
But like from a national standpoint, everybody who's not in the South might not be too hip to what's going on right now. It's kind of a really like crazy forward-looking angle, which these days that shit is crazy. It's like if somebody were to do that now, it's like, what? If Okada got the title back from Sonata, or Sonata just shows up in NXT with the New Japan title, it's like, oh, that's a lawsuit. You can't do that shit. Nope. But it'd be pretty cool. And then, of course, there's all sorts of, Jeff Jarrett dropped the Intercontinental Championship right before Bret Hart. That was the whole thing about the Montreal Screwjob.
Yep.
They didn't want WCW being able to say, we've got the WWF champion under contract. So that was a thing. And back in 91, kind of unheard of.
Yeah. It's, I don't know if at the time, and probably not, if WWE handled the belt situation like the NWA did. Probably not, because NWA was a loose alliance, by that point, maybe somewhat loose alliance of regional territories, where you put your retainer, your deposit down. I think it was $25,000. And, as long as the NWA had your deposit, that's your belt.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And maybe they thought, hey, there's kind of some legal wiggle room here since Flair they still have his deposit. He can show up on TV and claim to be the real world champion. And it is interesting. The most interesting part about Ric Flair and WWE, the short time he was there, is only a couple of years, and he won the championship in '92 Rumble, one of the best Rumbles ever. Is that it seemed from the get-go, or it would seem obvious, well, we finally get Flair Hogan.
Yeah.
These two guys who have been on kind of parallel paths, being the two top names in their respective territories, companies. We finally get to see them collide.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
At probably WrestleMania 8. Never happened.
Yeah.
It happened a couple times on the house show circuit. Never happened on TV.
I saw a picture the other day on Twitter. It came from one of the old magazines back then, and it was of Flair and Hogan in the ring having a face-off, and it was from one of those house shows. And, the story goes that, like, nobody knows the exact reason why they never did it, but, like, the prevailing theory, I believe, is that Vince saw the returns on the house show stuff and was like, there's not really a market for this. Nobody's going to want to see this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, enter Sid, exactly. I mean, it's funny because in retrospect, when you look on it now, you think, yeah, that was totally a missed opportunity. At the time, if the proof was in the pudding, again, at the time, if a big chunk of your audience had no previous Ric Flair experience, then I could see how Vince would be like, I'm just going to roll with this Sid guy instead.
What's interesting in various parts of Hogan in the late '80s, where they had it was a regular occurrence where they would bring somebody in to feud with Hogan.
Yeah, just cold.
Yeah, so it was not an uncommon situation where someone would come in and attack Hogan, and that there was a main event story for a few months, and then someone else would come in. It wasn't an uncommon thing for that to happen. So it's interesting in this scenario. Maybe Vince's expectations, seeing as Ric Flair, were so astronomical that anything less than his expectations being met were like, okay, this is a letdown. Let's just go with the tried true formula. Sid, come on in.
Yeah, no, that could be, because it ended up being Hogan, Sid, and it ended up being Flair, Macho Man. Were those the matches at Mania that year? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it obviously created one of the most buzzy moments back of the turn of the decade WWF, and some really long lasting for a guy who was there for as short as he was. And, like, he lost his title to Bret Hart at a house show. It wasn't even televised. Like, they showed it later on. But for as underwhelming as that run was, it had some huge moments.
Really did.
That was going on at the time. So, yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and move on now to number 6. CM Punk to AEW. Woo, boy.
We talked plenty about
seemed to be in the air, Larson.
We talked plenty about whether CM Punk being in AEW was a net positive or not in the worst free agent signings video. So we don't need to really belabor that point. We don't get into that too much.
Right, yeah.
What we can talk about is the benefits, at least short-term, immediate benefits that CM Punk had to AEW's business. Because those seemed, in a lot of respects, maybe outside TV ratings, pretty obvious. I mean, Tony Khan dubbed Punk his plus delta.
Good for business.
Punk had a pretty immediate and significant impact on pay-per-view buys, merchandise sales, so on and so forth. He got the wrestling world and a lot of mainstream outlets talking about AEW because of his return after being gone for, what was it, 7 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So from a short-term standpoint, and to really, that stretch in the summer of 2021 in AEW is probably thus far their peak.
Yeah,
because it was the point in time in AEW's history since its inception where it really felt like, okay, this is a serious competitor for WWE. Maybe not in terms of ratings or revenue, but in terms of getting talent. Because it was Punk. And then a couple weeks later, it was Cole. It was Bryan Danielson.
Yeah.
And it felt like at that moment, this was a fulcrum in wrestling history, maybe, where AEW, to a degree, can turn the tides in their favor and get some good momentum behind them and really start making some inroads and becoming not just an alternative to WWE, but a serious competitor to WWE.
Well, dude, at the time, a little bit prior to this, AEW, their first year on television, they were, over 1 million total viewers on a regular basis. And if you recall, there were times when WWE's Raw's numbers were in the dumpster.
Yeah,
and
like
so
1.3, 1.4 million, yeah.
If you were looking at the trajectory of both companies, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility if things continued the way they were going that AEW, it was not impossible to think AEW could have started matching Raw's overall viewership. Obviously, that didn't happen. Vince McMahon stepped down. Triple H came up. Judgment Day was born, and so AEW started their decline once Cody left. So, that's my history, and I'm sticking to it. But I think the one thing that's really important to remember about CM Punk going to AEW is you've sort of touched on it. And it, again, not to belabor the idea that, his overall, in a macro sense, in a larger sense, his alignment with AEW was a negative. You could, I would think that it's a net positive in that, again, the precedent of a guy coming in who's a big deal, a big name for big money, and legitimizing the company, I think had ripple effects down the line. Now, I'm sure Danielson and Cole probably would have come in regardless, and maybe you could have looked at them as that precedent as well, along with guys like, later on Keith Lee, Swerve, et cetera, Saraya coming back, all that kind of stuff. But, he was the first of that big batch and the biggest of that batch. And that might have turned a lot of heads in terms of, again, legitimacy. This is a cool place to be, and this might be the future of wrestling. Whatever
played out afterwards.
It's a legitimate, right.
It was massive,
right? But it's still, look, it's still a legitimate place to go. Will Ospreay had WWE, reportedly interested, and he went with AEW for reasons. But and it's never, even to this day, if, for example, because his name has been thrown out there, a lot of Drew McIntyre decides to leave WWE and go to AEW, would it be surprising? Maybe. Would it be shocking? No, not at all, because AEW is a legitimate big-time wrestling company that's on cable television. They're able to offer big money contracts.
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and move on now to number 5. Chris Jericho to WWF.
Yes. So he wasn't the first, big name WCW talent to go from WCW to WWF. Big Show, Paul White. 98, February 98.
It was February of 98?
Yeah, you showed up at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Remember that cage match? Between Stone Cold and Vince?
No, I remember the event. For some reason, I thought it was after. I thought it was in 99, but yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I got you.
Oh, sorry, 99. Yeah, you're right, 99.
Oh, whoa, okay. When was Jericho? Was what, May of 99? August of 99. Okay, so he still preceded him. Okay.
Yeah. So, but with Jericho is a situation where it was someone who had seemingly all the potential to be a main eventer in WCW, but because of various reasons, Hogan never really reached their full potential in WCW as main event talent. And he was kind of the first of of those group of guys that went to WWE, WWF, and within I think about a few months, followed by the Radicals.
Yeah, right.
I think it was early 2000 that the Radicals went over to WWF as well. And obviously Jericho had a storied career in WWE, WWF. Who knows what would have happened if he had decided to stay in WCW.
Yeah, that's one thing that we could go endlessly on about, and maybe be kind of an interesting video, is the youth movement at WCW and just how much of a ceiling it had because of Hulk Hogan. And I mean, to a degree, what Bischoff thought of Goldberg as well. I mean, Goldberg was a younger guy who, WCW basically made in their performance center, like a RoboCop situation. But, and because of his force of character, his look, how they pushed him, he was very successful in reaching the top. Yeah. But one guy is not an entire youth movement. No. Guys like Jericho, Benoit, Guerrero, Raven, those were guys that WCW, Rey Mysterio, those are the guys that really WCW could have had their own renaissance with as a youth movement. And instead, they basically flocked to WWE. And although, Giant, I remember watching live with you when he showed up. And it was cool and certainly surprising. I don't know about shocking, because even the tail end of his WCW career, it's not like he was
smoking cigarettes and stuff.
He was smoking cigarettes. Like, he was not hot. You could tell the guy was sort of checked out at that point. And so, but Jericho coming in really was, because look, Giant, they brought Giant in. He beat Hogan in his first match. He had a monster truck match with him. Giant had sort of
lost
done
that first. That's the storied wrestling tradition, where if you lose your first match early in the card, you're in for huge things later on.
Right. Yeah, especially if your match is a
monster truck match.
Truck match. But with Jericho, it really was WCW. They're just old. They just want to skew old, and everybody knew Jericho was fucking cool. And he was the guy. And then when the Millennium Countdown started, and all the internet was abuzz, oh, it's Jericho. So much so that when it started, the crowd started chanting. When it started, when The Rock was doing his promo, the crowd was chanting Jericho. And then the greatest debut probably in wrestling history, still to this day in my mind anyways, Chris Jericho shows up. That song just absolutely was killer. And then, like you said, it was just, okay, Chris Benoit, they literally put the title on him, and he was like, nah, still going to go that day. No, I'm still going to, I don't want to go here. I don't want to be here anymore. Yeah. They had him beat Sid, and Sid's like, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I know Jericho going was really kind of emblematic of really at that point, tide had turned in favor of
big time.
WWF.
Yeah.
And WCW seemingly at a crossroads. What do? Do we adjust and embrace our youth movement and develop and push wrestlers who aren't in their 40s and 50s? Or do we double down on what we've been doing because the past it was successful, and see if that can get us back on the winning end of this ratings battle? And they went doubling down for a while, and then the Vince Russo stuff happened. Yeah,
I mean, eventually they did try a half-assed youth movement. They just tried to fast-track dudes like Palumbo, O'Hare, Mark Jindrak. That was a ball drop from both companies.
Oh, I know. Come on.
But, they did have, guys like Elix Skipper. It's like they had, but it's just by that time the creative, and if they had just run, I mean, could you imagine if they had Raven beating a Hulk Hogan?
I know.
Raven
Jericho beating a Hulk Hogan.
Could you imagine like a Raven Macho Man feud? You know what I mean? Like that would have been awesome. But they didn't, Eric Bischoff just was like, no, well, these are the guys that are, I still love the story of how Raven ended up on the cover of NWO WCW Revenge. It's just the guy doing the box art just liked Raven. So he put him on there. Yeah. But in my mind, when I saw that, I was like, no, this is legit, because Raven's a badass.
Yeah.
He deserves to be there staring at Hulk Hogan while Hulk Hogan is facing off with Goldberg.
Yeah. Totally. 1,000%.
Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to number 4. For life. The Outsiders go to WCW. Oh my God! Talk about game changing, dude. Wow.
Yeah, massive. Of course, this all led to the NWO. I mean, I don't know what more to say about it. It turned the tide of the wrestling business in favor of WCW. That NWO storyline, that was all started by Scott Hall showing up on a random Nitro, I think May of '96, with his denim vest and his jeans on, saying, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here."
I am.
And then a matter of a couple weeks later, Kevin Nash joins him, and then it was off. And you hear about the genesis of the storyline, inspired by was a UWF Invasion of New Japan or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And for 83 weeks, WCW was the top dog in the wrestling world, largely because of the NWO.
Yeah,
and it all started with Hall and Nash.
Well, it's interesting too because right before this, literally 2 months before, WCW Uncensored in '96 had Hogan and Savage versus the Dungeon of Doom.
Yeah.
And it's like you see just how dog shit that is. And that's not to say that Hogan wasn't a massive deal for WCW, because we've still yet to talk about that, and we will.
Yeah, we will.
But for Hall and Nash obviously had just come off of being champion for a year prior in WWF. And then Scott Hall, super over as Razor Ramon, an innovator in his own right with the Shawn Michaels ladder matches, and being Intercontinental Champion. Certainly a guy who could have been and probably should have been world champion in WWF.
Oh, yeah.
And it's crazy to think, given that we were on the verge of the Attitude Era with, in just another year in WWF, two guys who completely and totally would have fit in with the Attitude Era was Hall and Nash. They went to WCW, and really the sort of, edge of the Attitude Era, not the wrestler edge, but the edge of the Attitude Era emphasized, they brought their own version of that to WCW.
Yeah.
And made it cool. They made WCW cool, because before that, again, just a bunch of dorks. Like, if you look at this, because I was doing some research for something else earlier, and if you look, dude, just literally 2 months earlier, we're talking about matches like DDP versus the Booty Man, which is like beefcake, but he was obsessed with his butt. Colonel Parker versus Medusa. And I actually watched that match. It's not very good. The Giant was taking on Loch Ness, giant haystacks. They call them Loch Ness. Yeah. That was happening 2 months earlier. This company would have closed by the end of '96 if it wasn't for Hall and Nash.
I know.
This was terrible.
It was. It really was. And by, kickstarting the NWO storyline and bringing in, I guess as Bischoff likes to put it, an era of more reality-based wrestling, it forced probably WWF's hand to embrace the Attitude Era. So, the domino effect of Hall and Nash going to WCW really can't be understated.
Yeah, absolutely. Also forced WWF to create fake versions of Hall and Nash.
Yes,
which is
not a good idea. It was also because they were kind of managed by heel Jim Ross.
No, man, I'm a bad guy now. Look at me. I'm a bad guy. I'm gonna show up at your Thanksgiving Day party without my pants on.
Oh my gosh.
All right, let's move on. Number 3. Adrenaline in my soul. Cody Rhodes goes to WWE.
Why'd I put this so high? I don't know.
Oh, I'll be honest with you. Why didn't you put it any higher?
Because there's an obvious number 1, Steve.
No, I was actually kind of surprised by it. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I could see that.
Well, because the whole idea is Cody, he leaves in 2016 because he doesn't want to leave. He feel like he's being utilized to his fullest. He's stuck doing the Stardust thing, which he didn't seem to be a fan of.
No, not at all.
And he goes out and he reinvents himself. He goes and wrestles all over the world. He wrestles the PWG, goes to New Japan. Member of Bullet Club with a small little Bullet Club logo on his boots and nothing else.
Nothing else.
And he's a member of the Elite when they leave to form AEW. He's one of the executive vice presidents.
Yeah.
And Steve likes to think he's the straw that stirred the creative drink over there.
I am positive that's true, by the way.
He was the glue that held the whole thing together for the first few years of the company's existence.
Yeah.
And to see Cody leave the company he helped found as an alternative, as a competitor, if you will, to WWE to go to the WWE was pretty surprising. You hear, after the fact, you hear his reasoning, his rationale. Why? Makes sense. I get it. You can talk about wanting to win the title his dad never got to win. I get it. Makes sense. I can see why that would be something to be like, all right, I did this. AEW, I helped found this. It's in good hands now. We still don't know whatever this personal issue was that seemingly precipitated his departure. But, whether the thought had entered his head, I'm going to go to WWE regardless of that at some point to pursue this ambition.
Yeah.
We don't know. But you hear him explain, it's like, okay, that makes sense. I get it.
As we're sitting here, as you're sitting there and just your mouth is moving a lot, I'm thinking, how cool would it be? I'm joking. Everything you said is right. How cool would it be? This is an idea for a show over at Friendo Club Wrestling.
All right.
You and I go back and we react to us breaking news about certain events.
That'd be interesting. I want to go back to one where we found out that Bryan Danielson had unretired on air. People were screaming at us in chat.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for like 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good idea, isn't it?
That's not a bad idea. That's pretty good.
There you go. We're going to do that for Friendo Club Wrestling. But yeah, dude. So I forget exactly what I think I remember seeing this and being like, nah, no way. That's not going to happen. Because you think, man, you build it. Let me ask you this, because this is ground that's been covered, tried and true. And obviously we all know what a game changer Cody's been.
Yeah.
Do you think when Cody started AEW and was like, this guy, this billionaire is going to get us on cable TV, this could be my road back to WWE? I don't know if it would have been like foremost on his mind. I like to think that he probably went into AEW with the intentions of, I want to build this thing, and then probably just personality conflicts. I mean, I know he said there was some personal issue, but in my mind, it seems like there were different philosophies for, how to produce this wrestling show, and battling that might have just been not really his thing. And so he's like, you know what? I built this thing. They can take it from here. No hard feelings. I'm going to go. And then just, the bag was huge.
And
and
the most
push,
complex contract in wrestling history.
The push was huge. And it's like, this is a character that really is more fit for that WWE crowd with all the kids in attendance and stuff. And so, I don't know if he would stay up at night and be like, my options just opened up in a major way, and he created leverage for an entire, industry basically, which is awesome.
Yeah. It is awesome. It is awesome. Yeah. But it was pretty damn surprising to see the reports come out that he was working without a contract first, and then he was finishing up with AEW, and then he's going to WWE, and then sure enough, he shows up as Seth's mystery partner at Mania a couple years ago.
Opponent.
Yeah, sorry.
Seth probably wishes he was a mystery partner. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, mystery opponent at WrestleMania a couple years ago, and it seems likely at Mania 40 he's going to finish his story and get that title, well, at least the title with the lineage of the title that his dad never had.
And who could forget all the thumbnails back then? When will he, won't he? Oh, there's been a snag in the negotiations.
You know what we should do is go and see which wrestlers have been the most going in Raw thumbnails. It's probably Punk.
Probably Punk.
Probably Punk, and there's probably Cody.
I think you're probably right about it, because even in those 7 years without Punk, there are probably quite a few. Oh,
there were a lot. Because every little story about, is he coming back?
Yeah.
Thumbnail.
Yeah.
But that whole 4 months from when, 4 months when it was like, Cody's done with AEW, to him showing up at WrestleMania, at least twice a week, Cody was in a thumbnail.
Oh, at least. Yeah.
I feel like.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Let's move on to number 2. Hulk Hogan to WCW. So, yeah, go ahead.
So I was on the social media the other day, and I came across this thread from Trevor Dame. Did you see this about WCW 93?
I was reading this in my parents' house the other day, yeah.
And to get an idea of what WCW was like the year before Hulk Hogan arrived. This is just some of the highlights that are discussed in this thread.
Low lights.
Yeah, low lights. There was a card in January '93 that draws 550 people. Features Sting versus Vader, Barry Windham versus Ricky Steamboat, and Steve Austin versus Brian Pillman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
550 people. They had to delay a TV taping because a pipe broke in a bathroom. They were having shows in high schools.
They were having shows in high schools, and I think one of those shows, dude, there was a couple in that thread that was like the attendance was 100 people.
Yeah.
It got bad. It got really, really bad. It was like the high school, it was like 3 high school shows run back to back on successive nights with a total attendance of like 550 or something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I thought there was another thing in here about how they had to reshoot something because so many people left during the course.
Yeah, that was in there. I saw that too. Yeah, they had to reshoot an entire
there
episode.
it is. Yeah. So many people once left TV taping, they had to retape the whole show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
90% of the crowd left before it was over.
Yeah, 90%. Yeah.
You know, you talked earlier about if Hall and Nash didn't go to WCW 96, that company would have closed by the end of the year. Probably make the case if Hogan didn't go to WCW, that company had been closed by the middle of 94.
Yeah.
You know, if you read the Nitro book, it seemed like Bischoff came in and had to pretty much rebuild the company from the ground up.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he saw the opportunity to bring Hogan in, you know, convince him to spend the money to do it. And, you know, Hogan's first match was at Bash of the Beach 94 against Ric Flair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and I don't know if they sold out the building. It says here the attendance was 14,000, the Orlando Arena. That's where the Magic play. That seems like a sellout to me.
So, I mean, yeah, here's some reference for you. Super Brawl 95, which featured Hogan versus Vader. The attendance was 13,300. Super Brawl 4, which was February of 94, had half that. That was Flair versus Vader. Vader was like Mr. Super Brawl. But yeah, that was half that amount. So they were able to double their attendance event to event year over year. Yeah. The one before that was only it was less than that. It was 6,500. That was Super Brawl 93, early 93.
What was the main event for that?
Looks like Sting versus Vader.
Oh wow. Yeah, Vader is Mr. Super Brawl.
Vader is Mr. Super Brawl. Look at that. Stumbled upon a fun fact.
Look at that. So, you know, say what you will about Hogan, and we said a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, him reversing the fortunes of WCW again. It led to, you know, he came back. They were doing really well, and they were kind of middling. You know, until Hall and Nash came in and bang.
Yeah.
The 83 weeks shortly thereafter began where they were on top.
Yeah.
You know, and if Hogan hadn't gone to WCW, who knows if Hall and Nash would have ever had the opportunity to entertain a contract offer from WCW.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, it is interesting to see, you know, the timeline and how WCW did really execute a couple of really, really smart moves, and how Hogan, you know, say what you will. I know he has said that he was on the fence even to the moment where he was supposed to walk out and join the NWO. He might not have done it, and they might have had to have, hey, ref, have Sting turn, you know? But you know, all those right moves, it was just a couple of good moves, changed those fortunes real quick.
Yep.
And then they just kept on shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. That Hogan contract in 98. Oh, wow.
Yeah, that really did. That really put a vice grip on a lot of the creative of that company.
Yep.
But anyways, let's go ahead and move on to number 1.
What?
Stone Cold Steve Austin heads to WWF. I came in there, Vince McMahon was like, hey, Steve, we got this gimmick for you. It's called Ringmaster. I was like, all right, that sounds like dog shit, but let's go ahead and get it done. Of course, Stone Cold Steve Austin had been fired via FedEx by Eric Bischoff after he had been injured, and went to ECW, cut a couple of bitter ex-employee promos on the company, and then went over to WWF, and they put him with the $1 Million Man. But lo and behold, little did they know that one cold cup of tea later, Stone Cold Steve Austin would be born. He'd grow out a goatee, shave his head, and then he'd be the biggest draw in the history of wrestling.
Yeah, and to think he could have been what? Frosty McFreeze?
Frosty McFreeze. Yeah, there was like Jack Frost, I think, was one of them or something like that.
There's a list of the most awful names you can imagine for a wrestler.
Yeah. And then he was like, "Damn, let me think about this." And then it's funny because I guess he was watching like an HBO special on the Hitman.
Yeah, it was a Hitman that De Niro played in The Irishman, wasn't it?
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
And he went to Vince, says, "I'm gonna be him," and then he gave him the name, and then Stone Cold came up with the name Stone Cold, and then as soon as he turned, it's crazy to like the evolution of Stone Cold's voice. Like it was there in WCW. That first year he wrestled in USWA, he sounds like I watched this again. I watched a different episode of early US.
Yeah.
He sounds nothing like it's nuts. It is absolutely crazy. It's like he was like, "Yeah, I started down to nothing but whiskey and 5 packs of cigarettes a day." Because that's what it sounds like. He sounds like a completely different person.
Yeah, I know. It gets gruff. It's like you watch Pacino and The Godfather and see him in I don't know anything in like the late 80s and 90s, and the voice is completely different.
Yeah, I know. It's bizarre. It's weird.
Yeah.
But clearly, Vince McMahon, I mean, brought him in as a good hand, as a good technical wrestler, because he was.
Yeah, he was.
But it took a little bit of rebranding on Stone Cold's part to Vince McMahon's credit, man, he ran with it. As soon as he saw what he had, he absolutely ran with it. The big double turn there at WrestleMania with Bret Hart, WrestleMania 13, and by 14, the Stone Cold era had begun and wrestling history had been made. But, just imagine if Vince was so stuck in his ways then as he was towards the tail end of his run in WWE here. I don't know. We would have gotten Stone Cold Steve Austin,
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know. I mean, it seemed at the time, and maybe to a degree, he felt like his hand was forced given the nature of the industry at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had to think on his feet, be fluid. I understand when Stone Cold was doing the ringmaster stuff, it was before Hall and Nash, I believe, even showed up in WCW. It was early '96, but certainly by the time WCW really started gaining momentum, I would imagine Vince would be like, all right, we got to roll with whatever seems to be working at this juncture. We got to get these numbers up.
Yeah.
So, and if when Austin seemingly captured lightning in a bottle and started getting super over really quick, they did it. They at the time they took a really interesting approach where he was obviously getting pushed, but they weren't rushing anything.
Right, they weren't. Yeah,
he was losing matches left and right, but it seemed to have no effect on his popularity.
Yeah, much like another young superstar of today, LA Knight. Yeah. Making all his Boss Hog references. Anyways, I like our honorable mentions list here because this is a list that could have easily gone 15 or 20.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
It really could have. So we got on the honorable mentions, we've got Mox heading to New Japan and AEW. I mean, it's one thing for Jericho to leave and go do that stuff, but Moxley was like a current, relevant former member of the Shield, right there with the WWE title, could be in the WWE title scene. Yeah. And when he was like, "Yeah, I've got enough money, my truck is paid off, I'm going to go," and it's like, holy shit, he's doing New Japan, and then oh my god, he's in AEW.
Yeah,
game changer.
It was the Radicals. Mentioned them earlier. Going to WWE.
Yeah,
I still remember watching them when they showed up, sitting ringside, getting to that fight with New Age Outlaws.
Yeah. Do you remember what Perry Saturn was wearing?
It was it was like a silk shirt, wasn't it?
Wasn't it like
he had the hat on
he definitely had the hat on. Didn't he have like a cheetah print shirt?
Maybe, yeah.
I forget. Something like that. Eddie Guerrero, I think, was wearing like a what do you call those ones? The turtleneck.
Turtleneck, yeah.
I think. I don't know. Anyways, Kurt Angle to TNA. Sort of TNA's biggest, I think, maybe acquisition of all time.
Yeah, you can make that case. Yeah.
We're in the honorable mentions right now.
Your barking cat seems to agree. Kurt Angle going to TNA, huge deal. Bret Hart going to WCW, someone who seemed to like and had the contract to indicate it. A WWE lifer.
Yeah.
Until Vince is like, I don't want to honor your contract that I signed with you just like a year or two ago, and you could go now. All
of which captured on film on film history. In
contract negotiations gone wrong.
Yeah.
And then finally, Bryan Danielson going to AEW. It's he's a star roughly on the magnitude of CM Punk.
Sure.
and him having such a long and illustrious career in WWE to go to AEW, pretty much just so he can wrestle the way he really wanted to.
Yeah.
It seemed to be the primary reason. He just wanted to go back to being Bryan Danielson rather than Daniel Bryan.
Again, a guy who was just in the WrestleMania main event getting stacked.
Yeah.
Stacked.
He did get stacked.
By the Tribal Chief, but nevertheless, in the main event, the guy that Vince McMahon looked at and was like, Edge isn't good enough. This needs some more star power. This needs to get juiced up. Let's put Daniel Bryan in there. And then 6 months later, the Yes movement goes to AEW. But instead of yes, it's I'm going to kick your fucking head in.
Yeah.
Which is all sorts of
And it's been
awesome.
spectacular.
It's been great. It's been awesome. Yeah. Fucking every match is a match of the year candidate with this guy.
You got that right.
This guy. Anyways, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Countout. Let us know what other game-changing free agent signings did we miss. Put them in the comments below. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it. Till next time, we'll see you around.
Goodbye.